Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with a thesis that's pretty provocative. It's meticulously documented, sure, but it really confronts the health of, well, a foundational institution in American society.
It really does.
We've got this source material, a sociological and theological critique called An Empty Sanctuary, Testing the Death of Classical Christianity in America. And the premise is, frankly, blunt. It suggests that the kind of orthodox classical Christianity, the kind that really anchored large parts of the country, well, it's either dead or, in serious decline.
And that distinction is so important right from the start, because the source isn't just giving us another report about numbers going down. We hear that all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead, it argues the erosion is fundamentally structural. It's talking about a hollowing out, that's their term, of what they call word-centered, doctrine-anchored church life. So, yeah, this isn't just some casual observation about culture changing. It's framed as a deep diagnostic of the institution's integrity.
Absolutely. So our mission today really is to get past those easy headlines. We need to unpack the specific data, the sociological theories, the things that lead these authors to such a, well, profoundly challenging conclusion.
Right.
Because the whole argument hinges on this central idea, this really provocative hypothesis they call the liturgical stress test. And it boils down to a simple, almost devastating question for really any congregation. If the music stops, who remains?
That phrase, it functions as the key diagnostic tool, doesn't it? Especially for the modern American church context. Our task isn't just reporting, fewer people in the pews. It's understanding the why and the how. How did this alleged deformation happen? We have to look at the mechanisms of dependency that the paper claims are, well, holding the whole structure together.
Okay, so let's start by defining the core problem because, on the surface, the numbers could be a bit misleading. You look at Pew data, 2024, it says over 60% of Americans still identify as Christian. That sounds huge, still a majority. So why does the source material basically say that number doesn't mean much anymore?
Well, they argue it's become a kind of dangerous statistical misdirection.
Yeah.
They're saying, sure, people might hold the label Christian, maybe for historical reasons, cultural background, whatever, but the actual beliefs, the behaviors, they no longer line up with historic orthodoxy. The kind that requires you actually believe core doctrines, like Jesus being divine, Scripture having authority.
Well, by the non-negotiable.
Exactly. The label is there, but the theological substance, the integrity, they argue it's gone.
So what's left then, according to this paper, they use this really striking term, Christianity in name only, just a shell. They call it a performative echo of itself. Spiritually unanchored, kind of ethereal, maybe nostalgic, but totally unformed by those core theological ideas. It makes me think of an old house, looks great from the outside, maybe a beautiful Victorian, stood for ages. But inside, termites have eaten away the structure. Looks fine, but the slightest pressure, and it could just collapse.
That's a perfect analogy. The hollowed house captures that hollowing effect precisely. The public identity seems intact, right?
Yeah.
But the private internal coherence, it's just not there. And that immediately sets up why they need this stress test. If the house is structurally unsound, what small disturbance, like just taking away the music, the aesthetic part, will reveal that there's no load-bearing doctrine inside.
Okay, so let's lay that groundwork with the hard data. We need to show this decline isn't just anecdotal, it's measurable. Not just empty seats, but abandoned beliefs. Where should we start? Attendance figures seem like the obvious place.
Yeah, let's look at Gallup first.
Okay.
It gives us that long-term view showing the structural shift. They point to a really significant drop in reported weekly church attendance. Back in 93, it was around 42%.
Okay.
By 2023, it's plummeted to about 30%. Now, that's not just slow aging or demographic drift. That's a 12-point drop in 30 years.
Wow.
That represents millions of people just systematically opting out of showing up for communal worship every week.
And it's crucial, isn't it, to put that attendance data next to the identity data we just talked about.
Absolutely.
Q highlights this huge gap between saying you're Christian and actually doing anything about it. That 60% might say they are, but only 33% of those people actually go to church, even monthly.
Right.
That says so much about the low commitment level the source is getting at. The majority of self-identified Christians are, well, functionally not participating.
And that vacuum
Yeah.
is being filled, and filled fast. While institutional faith drops off, you see this rapid growth of the knowns, people identifying with no religion at all. That might be the biggest social change in religion over the last, generation?
Seems like it.
Back in 2007, there were only about 16% of U.S. adults. Now, 2024, it's 29%.
Nearly third.
Nearly a third. That trajectory just points to accelerated disaffiliation. The non-religious group is almost as big as the group that actually practices their faith consistently.
And this isn't just hitting, small struggling churches on the edge. It's structural. It's hitting the big players, the major denominations. The sources give some really concrete examples of how these huge organizations are, well, shrinking dramatically.
Oh, the structural collapse is undeniable when you look at the membership losses.
Mm-hmm.
Take the United Methodist Church, a huge institution historically.
Yeah.
They've lost over 4 million members since 1970. 4 million.
That's staggering.
We're talking about losing entire regional church structures. It impacts their ability to support missions, schools, hospitals. It's a systemic loss of infrastructure, of presence in the community.
And what about others, like the Presbyterians?
PC, USA.
Yeah.
The contraction there is even sharper, their membership.
Yeah.
Down by over 60% since 1980.
60%.
Yeah. Think about that. More than half the organization just vanished in 40 years. These aren't just numbers. That's historic churches closing their doors, selling off buildings, endowments dwindling, generational cultural capital just gone.
And even the Catholic Church, which you think of as this global giant, isn't immune in the U.S. context.
Not at all. They're facing the same American secular drift. Catholic Mass attendance has dropped sharply. It was around 55% back in 1965.
Okay.
By 2020, it was down to about 20%.
Wow.
So this decline across the board, mainline Protestants, historically black churches, traditional Catholics, it points to something deep, a collective shift in society about the value people place on institutional religion and their willingness to commit to it.
But this is where the source material really pivots, isn't it? This is where they make their sharpest, maybe most controversial argument. They say the death isn't just numerical bodies leaving. It's primarily confessional. It's about the doctrine being abandoned. The hollowing out happened before people walked away.
Exactly. That's the core of your thesis. They argue that doctrinal weakness actually creates the environment where numbers decline. And they back this up with data showing, frankly, a shocking lack of basic theological knowledge. Barna Group, 2022, they found less than 17% of churchgoers could even articulate a biblical worldview.
17%.
Yeah. If the vast majority of people actually in the church can't define the basic intellectual framework of the faith they claim, well, the word can't possibly be central, can it?
Let's pause on that for a second, because this finding, this really gets to the heart of it. The source highlights this Ligonier study from 2022 as maybe the most alarming proof of this death of orthodoxy. They found, and this is staggering, that 43% of self-identified evangelicals agreed with the statement that Jesus was a great moral teacher, but not God.
Yeah. That finding is, well, catastrophic from a historical Christian standpoint.
It's not a secondary issue.
Not at all. It's the central defining core theological claim. If nearly half of your most committed group evangelicals deny the divinity of the central figure, then the institution has effectively redefined itself out of existence, whatever name is still on the sign outside.
Right.
This is what the paper means by the hollowing effect.
Okay.
The belief structure itself has collapsed. What's left might be, trying to be good people, orthopraxy, but without the orthodoxy, the actual core beliefs.
And that separation, orthopraxy from orthodoxy, that's key here. Because if faith just becomes about being nice or doing good deeds, but it's unmoored from doctrine, well, how is that different from secular humanism?
Exactly.
The sources argue this creates a faith system that's just too thin. It's functionally incapable of standing up to the pressures of modern life, and that paves the way for the big exit we see in the numbers.
Precisely. The doctrinal weakness precedes the numerical decline.
Okay, so this overwhelming data, the empty pews, and maybe more importantly, the empty theology, it sets the stage for the paper's main theoretical idea, this concept of liturgical dependency. We need to understand why they zeroed in on music as the key diagnostic tool for this whole systemic problem. It starts, they say, with a historical shift, an inversion in how worship is focused.
Right. Historically, you look back across different traditions globally, worship was designed primarily to be word-driven.
Yeah.
It's centered on the objective truth of Scripture, right? Administering sacraments, communal formation through rigorous teaching, structured prayer. The goal was to objectively shape the believer in theological truths. It wasn't really about how you felt on a particular Sunday. It was about formation.
And contrast that, as the sources do, with a lot of contemporary American practice. Especially, they point to large evangelical and charismatic spaces. The shift seems huge.
It's been profound. What you see now is that effective experience is generating strong, positive emotions, sensory engagement, aesthetic enjoyment. These have kind of flipped the focus.
So the experience itself becomes the point.
Often, yes. And that experience is frequently mediated almost entirely through contemporary music. It's moved from being a supporting element to becoming the emotional core, even the structural center of the service.
Okay, so this is where we get to that key concept. Music becomes the functional liturgy.
That's the term, yes. It starts serving as the proxy for faith itself. It provides the emotional scaffolding, right? That feeling of transcendence, the sense of connection, the collective coherence, things that arguably the doctrinal content often isn't delivering or demanding anymore.
So if the music creates an inspiring feeling,
People equate that feeling with spiritual health. It doesn't matter how theologically thin the sermon was or whether people actually hold orthodox beliefs. The good feeling validates the experience.
so when the source says music is the functional liturgy, they mean it's doing the jobs that maybe the creed or confession or the sacrament used to do, like providing that shared story, setting the rhythm, creating that sense of transcendence together.
Precisely. The music becomes the thing that makes the whole hour feel religious or spiritual.
Okay.
And so, logically, if you remove that functional liturgy, the music you're pulling out, the main source of that aesthetic validation, that emotional connection, you're testing spiritual appetite, sure, but you're specifically testing the appetite for just plain doctrine versus the appetite for an emotional performance.
And there's a broader context here the sources really emphasize, this shift from a Christendom culture to a secular pluralist society. That seems critical to understanding how the church adapted or maybe maladapted.
Oh, it's a massive sociological backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
In a Christendom-informed culture, the church didn't have to try so hard, in a way.
Right.
It had automatic cultural prestige, power. Going to church confirmed your social standing. It was good for networking. It ensured participation. Even if people's faith was maybe lukewarm, there was a kind of cultural expectation.
But that's gone now.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
In today's secular pluralist world, the church can't lean on cultural inertia or prestige. It can't assume generational transfer anymore. And the sources argue that the structure that's left is that echo we talked about. Without that external cultural support, the institution often lacked the internal doctrinal gravity to hold itself up.
Which led to a desperate need for something else to keep people interested.
Arguably, yes. A reliance on these effective elements, like music. If you can't rely on cultural pressure, you have to draw people in by offering a compelling product, something better than secular society offers. And since demanding deep doctrinal commitment is, well, hard and maybe restrictive, the paper suggests the alternative became offering a really high-quality aesthetic performance. The music, the stagecraft. It's a way to compete for market share in a very crowded spiritual or even just entertainment marketplace.
That sets us up perfectly for the next section, the music test itself. If this theory is right, this dependence on the feeling, on the aesthetic, then taking the music away should instantly show the theological vacuum underneath. We need to analyze why pulling this one element, the music, is supposed to be such a powerful diagnostic tool.
Well, the hypothesis itself is pretty straightforward, as we said, brutally clear. Remove the music and observe. This stress test isn't about musical style, hymns versus rock anthems. It's about dependency. The paper wants to figure out, are people drawn by the object of worship God, Christ, the doctrine, or by the experience of worship, which is now often defined by the music?
And the expected outcome highlights the contrast. In a church with deep doctrinal roots and commitment, taking away the music or having silence, well, it might actually deepen reflection. More space for scripture, for confession, for prayer, things that sometimes get rushed in a high-energy service.
Right. But in a church that's become dependent on that aesthetic draw, that musical performance, silence is terrifying. It signals the removal of the main attraction, the primary incentive. And so the motivation to even be there can just evaporate.
Okay, but why is this aesthetic dependency so fragile? Why does it lead to low retention, according to the sources? They bring in some sociological models to explain this, moving beyond just theology. This feels like the intellectual core here.
It really is. They lean on 3 key sociological models to explain the why behind the test's expected results. We should definitely spend some time unpacking these.
All right, let's start with the first one. Religious market theory, or RMT, often associated with Stark and Fink. What's the basic idea, and how does it apply to the music test?
Okay, so RMT basically views religion as operating in a competitive marketplace, like other goods or services. But here's the key finding from Stark and Fink. Religion thrives best when it demands commitment. Their research suggests that strict churches, ones with high demands on belief, behavior, time, tend to grow and retain members better than lenient ones.
That seems counterintuitive. High demands lead to growth.
It does, but the theory is that high cost signals high value. If something demands a lot from you, you perceive it as being more worthwhile. It weeds out free riders and builds a highly committed core group.
Okay, so how does the paper connect that to the music test?
They argue that these low-commitment, entertainment-driven church models where music is the primary attraction naturally yield low retention.
Now, let me push back a little here. Is it fair to say that having good music automatically means low commitment? Can't you have both?
You absolutely can have both. The issue isn't the quality of the music itself, it's how the music is used. The paper's analysis suggests that when high-quality music becomes the main event, it often functions as a substitute for high-cost doctrinal adherence or demanding discipleship.
Ah, okay.
It provides a quick, satisfying aesthetic reward without requiring deep study or painful self-reflection or adherence to tough ethical standards. The cost of entry is low. Just show up and enjoy the show.
So low cost implies low perceived value.
According to RMT, yes. If the commitment cost is low, then when the benefit, the music is removed or even just reduced, the perceived value plummets and people leave. The music in this model becomes the delivery system for low-demand spiritual entertainment.
Okay, that connects directly to the second model they use, rational choice theory, RCT. This focuses more on the individual's decision-making.
That's exactly. RCT assumes that people, even in religion, are basically rational actors seeking some kind of benefit. They're weighing the cost, time, energy, money, against the perceived benefits. So if the main benefit someone gets from church is primarily aesthetic, that spiritual concert feeling, rather than spiritually formative, like a challenging encounter with truth that changes you, then removing the primary aesthetic incentive, the music, just radically changes that cost-benefit calculation.
So if I'm making a rational choice and the benefit I want is that emotional high or maybe that feeling of belonging that the music helps create, and the band is the way I get that, then when the band's gone, the cost my Sunday morning time suddenly seems way higher than the benefit I'm getting. I'm going to rationally choose to spend my time elsewhere, doing something with a better return for me.
Precisely. The transaction basically fails. The source argues that music allows the church to compete using secular metrics, aesthetic quality, performance value. But if the spiritual benefit gets defined by that aesthetic quality, the moment you strip it away, the spiritual value collapses for many because the deeper transcendent claim, the doctrine, wasn't really the main draw for them in the first place.
Okay. And the third model, Durkheimian ritual theory, this sounds like it connects the music more to community, to what holds people together.
Yes, Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, talked a lot about the power of rituals in binding communities. He said rituals are crucial for creating what he called collective effervescence, that shared, heightened emotional state where people feel connected to something bigger than themselves and to each other.
That feeling you get in a great concert or a packed stadium.
Exactly that kind of feeling. And in many modern large churches, especially megachurches, the argument is that the music often serves as the primary, maybe even the only, shared ritual that everyone experiences together at the same time, creating that effervescence.
It's the shared emotional wave, the lights, the volume, the beat, that defines the we in that moment.
Yes. And the paper argues that for many attendees, if you take away that powerful, collective emotional ritual, the music, the community cohesion just fractures. Because the thing holding those otherwise disparate, maybe low-commitment individuals together was that shared feeling. Without the music, they're just a collection of strangers listening to someone talk, maybe about difficult things. The community, defined by the feeling, dissolves.
So the music test reveals whether the community is bound by shared doctrine and deep relationships, or primarily by that shared emotional experience generated by the music.
That's the core of the Durkheimian angle, yes.
Now, the authors know it's hard to run controlled experiments on faith. So they point to a huge, real-world event that acted as a kind of massive forced music test for almost everyone, the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, the pandemic closures were, in a sad way, a perfect natural experiment for this hypothesis. Churches were forced online, often overnight. Many just couldn't replicate the high-production live music experience online. It's technically really demanding.
Right.
So what did people get instead? Often just simple preaching, maybe poorly produced video, sometimes with little or no music. And this immediately exposed a vulnerability. Engagement just plummeted for many.
And there's specific data on this, right? Lifeway Research in 2021.
Yes, they found something pretty shocking. 42% of regular church attendees said they did not watch a single online service or sermon from their church during the closures.
42%. And these are the regulars, not just casual visitors.
Exactly. These were supposedly the committed base.
Yeah.
Yet nearly half of them just stopped. They stopped when the only things left were the core theological substance, the preaching, and the need for individual spiritual discipline at home.
So the implication is?
The implication, according to the source, is that for almost half the regulars, their interest just vanished when the aesthetic wrapper and the communal ritual, the totality of the experience, which crucially included the music, was taken away.
Wow. The paper's conclusion here sounds pretty forceful then.
It is.
Yeah.
They argue that the theological content alone wasn't enough to keep nearly half the regulars engaged when the performance aspects were stripped away. It provides really potent, large-scale anecdotal evidence supporting their liturgical stress test idea.
Yeah.
It was the moment the music stopped, literally, for many. And for millions, it seems, nothing compelling was left.
Okay, but to keep this balanced, as a deep dive should, we need to look at the counter-arguments and the nuances the source itself brings up. Because they're not just saying all music in church is bad.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
That's a really crucial distinction they make repeatedly. The paper is extremely careful not to reject music itself. I mean, Scripture is full of affirmations of song. The songs are literally prayers and poems set to music, meant for worship, for formation. The issue isn't the music per se. It's the inversion of function. It's the dominance of the aesthetic over the substance.
So the key distinction is, music becomes problematic only when it starts to overshadow the word, the scripture reading, the sacraments, the teaching. When it shifts the focus from objective formation to subjective feeling, turning the service into more of a performance designed to generate an emotion, that's when it signals, and maybe even drives, decline. It moves from serving doctrine to kind of replacing it.
Exactly. It's about priority and function. And furthermore, the source does acknowledge exceptions. There are places where this hollowing out seems less pronounced. They point specifically to some traditional Orthodox and Catholic parishes, maybe some high church Anglican or Lutheran congregations.
Places with a strong established liturgy.
Right. Communities that have often retained a more robust, formal liturgy and a deeply anchored theology.
And in those contexts, the music often plays a different role, doesn't it?
Very different. It's often chant, or highly structured hymns, or organ music that's designed to support the ritual structure and reinforce doctrine, rather than drive a subjective emotional high. It's part of the enduring objective framework, not the main aesthetic event.
Okay, but there's a catch, right? Even for these exceptions.
There is. The source points out a pretty sobering caveat.
Yeah.
Even in these places that might be theologically healthier or more doctrinally sound, overall national participation in them is still very low and often declining. The membership statistics still show shrinkage, maybe just slower shrinkage, but shrinkage nonetheless.
Yep.
They might have more theological substance intact, but they're not immune to the broader societal secularizing trends.
Okay, even the healthiest islands are finding it hard to stay afloat in the national tide.
That seems to be the picture, yes. Secular drift is a powerful force, regardless of worship style.
Okay, what about genuine revival? Or pockets of real growth? You can always find some churches that are growing that seem vibrant and deeply committed, right? The source must acknowledge those.
It does. It acknowledges these spirit-born exceptions, as they call them, small maybe, but vibrant communities marked by genuine spiritual hunger and deep commitment. But here's how they frame it, and it's really significant. They put it within the context of the remnant pattern.
Okay, explain that. Like Elijah in the Old Testament.
Exactly like Elijah, where God tells him, even in a time of widespread national apostasy, I have kept for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. The existence of a few small, healthy, highly committed groups doesn't refute the diagnosis of a national crisis. According to the source, it actually confirms it. These healthy remnants show what faithfulness looks like, but their small size highlights how widespread the lack of health is in the majority.
Wow, that's a powerful reframing. So finding a few really solid churches doesn't negate the overall trend.
It actually underscores the trend, in their view. It confirms the religious market theory idea too, faith survives where it demands real commitment. But the paper's main point remains. These committed groups are now like islands in a vast sea that's either secularizing rapidly or has become doctrinally hollowed out. Their health can't be used to paint a rosy picture of the overall state of American Christianity. The institutional decay, they argue, is widespread and real, even if localized vitality exists.
All right, let's bring this deep dive toward a conclusion then. Let's synthesize the core argument and get to the paper's final verdict.
Okay, The core finding, really, is that American Christianity still has the form. It's got the language, often the buildings, the organizational structures, the brand names, you could say. But the source argues pretty compellingly, I think, that the form lacks life. That classical definition rooted in doctrinal faithfulness, in the gravity of sacraments, in the Bible being absolutely central, that's just not the operating system anymore for the majority of people who wear the label Christian.
It's been replaced, they argue, by something thinner, like a religious sentiment, an echo, something that leans heavily on performance, on the aesthetic appeal, maybe on nostalgia, just to keep the facade going.
Exactly. And the authors conclude that when you apply that stress test, when the performance gets stripped away, when the music fades the sanctuary, in far too many instances, is revealed to be functionally empty.
The structure underneath has hollowed out, leaving behind maybe low-commitment consumers who just don't have a compelling reason to stick around when the show stops.
And this diagnosis leads the paper to make a very practical, maybe even radical proposal. They suggest churches and seminaries should actually do these liturgical experiments on purpose.
To diagnose themselves.
Yes, intentional Sundays of quiet, intense unhurried scripture reading, formal confession, simple unadorned prayer. Basically, replace the big musical performance with just the raw function of word and sacrament.
Eliminate the bands, the lights, the production. Just focus on the core doctrinal function.
Right. And the purpose is purely diagnostic. To force the question, make it unavoidable. Who is showing up for the objective truth claims of Christianity for Christ himself, and who's really just there for the subjective pleasure of the concert?
The results of that experiment, they argue, wouldn't lie. And it would give the remnant communities the clarity they need to rebuild, maybe smaller, but with real structural integrity.
This is a challenging proposal.
It really is. And this whole analysis, everything we've unpacked today, the source material anchors it in a specific quote. It's from the New Testament, 2 Timothy 3.5.
Yeah.
It really sums up their argument.
Yeah, that quote hangs heavy at the end. They have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power.
It just captures that essence, doesn't it? The idea of an institution that still goes through the motions, looks the part, but lacks the genuine theological engine, the spiritual power.
It perfectly describes that hollowed church idea. The external signs are there, the social function might even continue for a while, but the internal essential theological substance needed for real endurance, it's missing.
So, we leave you, our listener, with a final thought, a provocative question to maybe chew on, building on everything we've explored today from this source. When all the external supports, the cultural props, the aesthetic elements like the music and the lights, the community pressure, the nostalgia, the social benefits, when those are removed from any institution or any belief system that you hold dear, what fundamental, essential substance is actually left inside to carry its own weight? Think about what you rely on when the music stops.